Hello, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Haunted Locations. I'm Mallory, and I'll be your guide as we explore this haunted location. Today we are here in the beautiful Cheeseman Park in the heart of Denver. This park as we see it today was not always this beautiful. It's had numerous makeovers, beginning with the pioneers of the city. Let's talk a little about the history before we jump right into the creepy stuff. Cheeseman Park was named after Denver Water Company President Walter Scott Cheeseman back in 1907. Mr. Cheeseman was born in Long Island, New York in 1838, youngest of 9 children. Influential in creating the essential real estate and water development in Denver, it must have only seemed right to rename the park after him. Also, he is the man whose family was fiscally responsible for contributing to the neoclassical pavilion, Italian fountains, and pool that was in the park in 1908. Before 1907, this park was once called Congress Park because Colorado Representative Henry Morteller promised Congress if they approved their proposal to change the land from what it was, the old city cemetery, into a park, they'd rename the park after them in their honor. Mr. Teller was the man responsible for getting the appropriate permission to change the cemetery into a park and botanical gardens that we see now. As we can tell, Cheeseman Park is a place known for people coming out and enjoying the beautiful weather. Looking at it now, you would not consider it haunted, nor would you consider it inspiration for the sci-fi horror film The Changeling, whose haunted house is affectionately called the Cheeseman House, due to author's previous residence lying on the edge of Cheeseman Park. The visitors do not realize that they very well may be standing or sitting upon graves of many who were buried here in the 19th century, when the park was a cemetery for the city of Denver. We are here with Brian and Baxter with Rocky Mountain Paranormal who have investigated here before at Cheeseman Park. Thank you for joining us here today, and before we start, can you guys tell us a little about your group?
Well, I'm Baxter. This is Brian. We're known as Brian and Baxter from Rocky Mountain Paranormal Research Society. We've been researching the paranormal for about 25 years in the state of Colorado. So we have a pretty good background on a lot of the cases in the area. So,
how did your team become involved in paranormal research?
Well, our team has always been about paranormal research. We came to wanting to be paranormal investigators, slightly different routes, but the bottom line is what we saw that was being done in the industry or in the field.
Before it was an industry.
Yeah. People were doing it wrong. And we decided to come in and show everybody they're a bunch of idiots and we're right and they're wrong and we're better. And we have no egos about it. We're just better than everyone else. That's basically it.
Was there ever a scary moment for you guys?
Yeah, when the police pulled up and started wondering what it is that we're filming. I just thought I'd bring that up for the fun of it.
You guys do have your permits, right? You got your permits?
We've been asked that many times in this park. Ask that question again, would you?
Okay. Was there ever a scary moment?
There was this one time while we were here late at night, and Baxter was actually attacked by a guy who was flinging rose petals at him. It was
true.
Terrifying.
That is true. That is absolutely true. That is far
Didn't
scarier.
expect that, did you?
It's far scarier than the bloody eye one.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah. Actually, there's not very much that's scary about Cheeseman Park. It's a nice park. It just has a very frightening history.
Now, if you're afraid of cemeteries and the fact that there's dead people there, this might be a traumatizing experience just because there are so many people still buried in this park, but it's reasonably peaceful.
And you're standing on a corpse, and you're standing on a corpse. So...
Okay, so what was it that made you guys just want to come out to Cheeseman Park?
Well, watching the history getting butchered by everybody else made us feel like we needed to step in and tell the true story.
Yeah, unfortunately, over the years, because it does have this bizarre history, it's gained a lot of, well, like he says, changes in the history and really silly ghost stories to go along with it that don't really belong here and are just kind of destroying the reputation of the park. And one thing that we do along with the paranormal research is a lot of history. as much historians as we are paranormal investigators at this point, and this spot is one that we're really kind of touchy about when it comes to the destruction of its past.
What technology did you guys use when coming out here?
The library, the internet.
Ground penetrating radar.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's true. This was a different one. I mean, we didn't come out here and do a paranormal investigation.
Well, you can't.
Yeah.
There's a few reasons for that. Obviously, you probably see people wandering around and back, and they're all over out here. And during the night, there's more.
So when you hear voices out at the park, well, yeah, that's because there's a guy over there. There's another guy over there. There's a drug deal going on right there. You're gonna get voices that they're here.
And this comes from a very reputable resource that Cheeseman Park late at night becomes Denver's biggest undocumented medical marijuana dispensary. So it's a cleanup every night too.
Yeah, so it's not really something that you can come out and do a paranormal investigation. If you're going to do any kind of scientific research, you need to have somewhere where you can control the conditions. And you have no control over anything out here. So you can't do real research out here in that sense. So there's certain things that we can look into. We can look into the history. We can look into, are the bodies actually still here? We've been able to do both of those quite effectively. In fact, I think we've had more contact with the bodies here than any other paranormal investigation team.
That's true. And the other problem you have, if you do encounter people that say they've been conducting paranormal investigations out here late at night, you have to look at the fact that they've been breaking the law, because at 11 o'clock at night, the park shuts down to the public. And last time I checked, in the past 15 years, there's been one permit pulled for that purpose.
So, would you guys care to share with us some of your findings?
I think before we go into the findings, we should probably delve into our deep, dark description of this place.
Starting with the history, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, let's just roll this thing. How's that? You know where I'm going.
Okay, well, first of all, there are horrible stories about this evil undertaker that came out here and was breaking bodies and throwing them into different coffins so he could make more money.
Before we go there, let's go all the way back.
Okay, go for it.
So, back when the city of Denver was founded, this piece of land was acquired from Native Americans, real Native Americans. And unfortunately, it was a burial ground. The thing about it is, given to us, it was acquired via a land grant. When it was given to us, there was a huge stipulation that said, if, for any reason, you decide to put a cemetery there, of course they did, you can't bury the bodies any deeper than 3 feet deep. So they did put in this huge cemetery. The
reason for that is because they could not disturb the Native American bones. They could not disturb those bodies at all. So anybody that was buried here, like you said, 3 feet deep, and that really becomes a problem when you think about it. If you bury a body 6 feet deep, the ground is always damp. And I know that cop is just trying to figure out what he can do to question us.
Okay, next time he drives by, everybody
moon him. Boy, that was in stereo.
Yeah.
Okay. If you bury a body 6 feet deep, the ground is damp, and it stays damp, and that's a good preservative. Now, if you bury a body 3 feet deep, the ground dries out, it gets damp, it dries out, it gets damp, the ground gets very acidic and will eat through the casket, the clothes, the soft tissue. Pretty soon you're left in a relatively short amount of time with nothing but bones. Now, that's a pretty ugly way for us to be burying our dead, but why did they choose this place for a cemetery? I mean, of all places, why here?
The one place they were told not to.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that this was a beautiful spot at the time. It was on top of a hill. You had great views all the way around. And Denver was about 2 miles over that way. So there was really just this beautiful landscape that was quite attractive. Now, at that time in history, a cemetery was the crown jewel of a city.
Yeah, it sounds kind of bizarre to us these days, but back then, when you had a cemetery, it was a place that you took the family for a picnic. If relatives came to town, it was the place to go visit because it was a beautiful park. Unfortunately, due to no running water
No patrol.
No patrols out here. Nobody really watching it. It was falling apart, and it was becoming, quote, a boot hill. And that's when the city of Denver said, we need to change this up and do something a little bit different with it.
So it was very politically motivated on why they decided to put the cemetery here, but it did turn out to be a bad idea. So a politician made a bad choice. I know it's weird, but that's what happened. So they did make the decision to turn this into a park instead and move all the bodies out. So they said to the citizens of Denver, you have 60 days to move your loved ones out of this park and into two other cemeteries, and that was Riverside and Fairmont. So people started moving the bodies. The problem is the caskets were falling apart because of the 3 feet deep problem. So they had to get new caskets and then get them moved out. Well, Denver was a pass-through town at that time. And what that means is that there was a lot of people here that had no families. They were coming through because they were headed for the gold rush. Both tuberculosis and typhoid were, all the rage. All the kids were doing it. So there was a lot of people that were dying that had nobody to speak for them. So after everybody got moved out that had family here, they were still left with a ton of people out in the cemetery. Now, the Catholic cemetery had quite a few people on its own.
That's true. The Catholic cemetery was actually over here at the Botanic Gardens. And it was occupied up until the 50s. Now, the thing is, we always have been interested in how many bodies were actually out here. And we've started looking into the records over the years and discovered that they really didn't know how many were out here. Now, the Catholics claimed that they had about 20,000 people buried in their cemetery. In looking at the records as they were pulling the bodies up from the Catholic cemetery, it turns out that they knew the name of 6 of them. So record keeping was absolutely horrible out here. And you also had the problem of it wasn't just one big cemetery, it was one big location with a lot of little cemeteries. You had the Grand Army of the Republic, the Catholics, the Hebrew section, the Chinese section. Everybody had their own little area depending on either religion or ethnicity. So because of that, it was really hard to keep up with the record keeping.
Except for the Chinese, they did a good job.
The Chinese did an amazing job. In fact, if you look over the hill here, just to your, straight ahead of you, that is where the Catholic section was. Now, Chinese section. My drugs aren't working today. The thing about this area, somebody just found a body again.
I think so.
The thing about the Chinese section is...
No, I think they're trying to bury a body.
That's even cooler. Oh. The thing about the Chinese section is they knew where all of their people were buried. They really didn't have any questions. They were great at record keeping. However, because of cultural beliefs, they kind of freaked out the city of Denver a little bit because they believed that only the bones were sacred. So what they would do is dig up the bones and scrape them off, leaving a big pile of
not bones.
And then they take the bones and ship them back to the homeland. Now, the thing about this that we've discovered is they found out if you take a set of bones and put them on a ship, they charge you for a seat. But if you take a whole bunch of them, like they found here, and throw them onto a pallet and label it fish bones, you can ship it freight. So most of the people that went back to the homeland from here went back as fish bones. But as weird as it sounds, it was actually a big honor to have that done.
Yeah, that was called a lucky burial. And that means basically you were buried twice. If you got buried once, for some reason you had to be exhumed, the second burial was just your bones, and it was considered a very big honor. So all the people here that, didn't live a very good life when they were here because they were not treated all that well, they got this wonderful honorable burial back in China, so that's kind of cool. But that freaked out a lot of people, but Denver knew about it. Denver knew and understood what was going on. But then we had Undertaker McGovern, who was really, these days, he is said to be this horrible man that is very conniving, very greedy, and did all these horrible things. Not true at all. He was a very, very honorable guy and very well respected in town.
Well, as an example, just to show you how much the city of Denver hated him, the same year that they hired him to come out here and remove the bodies, they appointed him the Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade. And we know that you only do that for people that you don't like. So, yeah, they apparently liked him a little more than history tells us.
Yeah, he was a good guy, and he worked hard. Now, when he came out, he was having the same problems. The caskets were falling apart, and he had to replace them. Problem is after everybody else had gotten their relatives out and had to replace caskets, there was a mining accident in Utah, and they had a lot of fatalities, and we shipped out a bunch of caskets out there. So by the time Undertaker McGovern is in full swing of getting bodies out of here, he's running out of caskets. So he talks to the city of Denver and says, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we have a whole bunch of children's caskets, use them. So suddenly Undertaker McGovern is stuck with the job of breaking bodies in half. Now, he got paid extra because he got paid by the casket, but that's a crappy job. You know, I don't think anybody should be stuck with that job. That's a terrible job to have to do that. And his reputation a century later is terrible because of it. And it's not really fair what they did. But the city of Denver knew and understood what was going on. Then we had grave robbing. We had a lot of grave robbing, because when you think about the fact that these bodies are buried 3 feet down, very easy to get to, very easy to steal, you know, jewelry and body parts for that matter. Entire skeletons were stolen. Very strange.
It got to the point when they were pulling the bodies up there, and by they I mean Undertaker McGovern and his 13 assistants that always creeps people out.
That's spooky.
They ended up putting up a temporary house to store the bodies. And every time that they'd come in, it had been broken into, and they'd taken pieces and parts and jewelry. And they just could not get people to stop breaking in and stealing things around here.
Yeah, Denver didn't want to pay for any extra patrol out here, so it just happened. So city of Denver knew about it. So the problem is after a while, these 3 things, the Chinese graves, Undertaker McGovern, and the grave robbing, the newspapers got a hold of it. And they wrote a headline that said, "The Work of Ghouls." City of Denver wasn't too happy about that, so they said, that's it, everybody out of the pool, we're done. Anybody that's left here stays, and everybody else that's gone stays gone. And Denver did what it does best, they buried it. And here we are.
Yeah, and
They're still...
with our best guess, we've, like I said, brought out grand penetrating radar, looked at the old records, done some really sketchy math. And there's somewhere...
Not the new math.
No, not the new math. And done some estimates of somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 bodies still out here in the park with us right now. And that's not just this park, don't forget. We have the Botanic Gardens, and then on the other side of the Botanic Gardens, we have what's still known as Congress Park. Congress Park is a little park, and it's also an area that has Denver's 911 call center in it.
You can shut up.
Oh.
Oh, is she doing something she needed to stop?
Yeah,
Okay.
she's drooping her microphone. Okay.
Guess we need some more excitement over
Yeah.
here. Okay.
So
So I don't know if I messed up the end of that.
I
But
can back up a minute.
okay, go for it.
So over at Congress Park, we have a park and Denver's 911 call center. Now, it was the Hebrew cemetery, and it has an even creepier history to it, because after they exhumed the bodies, they did something that hasn't been done in any other cemetery that I know of. They hollowed it out and made it into a drinking water storage facility, and it still is now. So if you happen to be drinking water here in the area, there's a really good chance you're actually drinking water that's been stored where the graves were in the old Hebrew cemetery.
But it's kosher.
It's kosher water, so that's okay. Now there is, I guess we can talk about the house.
Well, actually, we should talk about the soil content.
Well, that's
I'll just
true.
say that's another big problem with the 3 feet thing. The content of the soil around here and in a lot of Colorado is a particular kind of clay.
That's true. Kind of a backstory to this. There is a big mansion that sits over on the other side of the Botanic Gardens known as the Waring House. In 1969, they were donated this house as an office. Well, just after they inherited the building, they noticed that it was settling a little too much, too fast. So they called out an engineering company. They came out and did some core sampling, and they core sampled themselves a vertical casket 6 feet underneath the building, which intrigued us because it shouldn't have been under that part of what was cemetery, and why was it standing on end? So we we did what any good paranormal research team would do. We got a hold of one of our on-staff geologists. If you're a good paranormal research team, you have a geologist. We have 3 now, I think. And I asked the question, so what can you tell me about the dirt out at Cheeseman? And that's when I learned, don't ask a geologist about dirt because they'll tell you a lie. But what it boils down to, and if you know anything about Colorado's geology, there's this wonderful kind of clay we have called bentonite. Bentonite, when it gets wet, kind of turns into really hydraulic water. So when we get a really good rain out here, these caskets are moving around like it's a river underground. So much so that they've actually had pieces and parts reported as far as about 2 blocks outside of the original cemetery boundaries. Now, we did have one person tell us a story that we were explaining. Skip forward, 2010. That was a long skip. They were planning on putting in a new parking lot on the other side of the Botanic Gardens, which is there now. And when they did, they actually found 54 bodies. They did it with a piece of heavy construction equipment, so it was pieces, and the medical examiner kind of had to piece it together. So
That was 2008.
You're right, that was 2008. Now in 2010, they were doing some work on the irrigation system here at the monument, and it turns out that they found 5 more bodies. And that's when we got involved.
Well, normally they don't let this kind of information get out to the press because of the fact that if it becomes discovered that Native American bodies were unearthed, they'd have to shut down the park, shut down the Botanic Gardens, call in the Native American nations. There's a lot of red tape. It could take years before the parks get reopened. So they try to keep it very quiet. But in this particular case, what happened was they were doing work on the sprinkler systems, and there's a guy working in the dirt and everything, and he comes across this body, these bones. So he pulls up the bones and he puts them in a cardboard box marked sprinkler parts, shoves it aside and goes back to work, as you do when you find a body. And he forgets about it and goes home that night, leaves the box there. Well, the next morning, a guy's riding his bike through the park and sees the box, gets curious. He opens up the box, and at that moment, he does what any of us would have done. He immediately called the KBPI morning show.
Yeah, and proceeded to keep one of the heads because we're still short by a skull.
So somebody's got an awesome bong. But that also made it so we knew about the bodies. So we called up the medical examiner and requested to come and examine them. We brought in the Metro State Human Identification Lab and decided that we were going to do some real forensics on these bodies and discover who these people were, how they lived, how they died. It's important information we don't have historically. So it was an amazing day of getting to spend very intimately with these bodies.
It's one thing to hear about the bodies at the park, it's another thing to have to clean off their skeletons to get the forensics done on them. In fact, we were actually giving a tour out here that night, and well,
I still had cemetery dirt from the bones on my clothes.
Exactly, so that was fun. What I can say is, as far as paranormal evidence out here, in the, like I say, 20-25 years that we've been looking out here, we found a lot of people making some claims
That are all explainable.
reasonably explainable, or you have to remember, if you come out here in the middle of the night in a place that you realize that there's thousands of bodies still out here buried with you, and these are people that are generally freaked out because there's bodies out here, the psychology behind it, they have all sorts of weird personal experiences. I can honestly say, never had anything paranormal happen out here, but we do have evidence that the bodies were out here. Not just the fact that we told you, not just the fact that we, well, have pictures of us playing with them, conducting science.
When I
on
said
them.
intimate earlier, I didn't mean necrophilia. That's not what I meant.
But the thing is, who knows? Can we show those to you? No, because they're not here anymore. They've been reinterred. However, we do have some of the old casket hardware that was pulled up here in 2010. This dates back to about 1865, and with the exception of that piece of cloth wrapped around the handle there, no cloth, no skin, no wood, nothing made it. And it was because of that really shallow burial. And we wouldn't recommend getting this stuff any other way than what we did, because then it's grave robbing.
Yes, yes. This was actually given to us by the medical examiner of Denver, so it's not illegal.
Yeah, we like when people of science believe us and work with us and give us things.
Okay.
Well, there was the short version.
Well, thank you guys for coming out here and joining us today and sharing all that.
Our pleasure.
I'm Mallory, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Haunted Locations in Denver, Colorado, Cheeseman Park. Hope to see you on another exciting episode of Haunted Locations.